Hey, what's going on, everybody out there? I'm simultaneously recording here on Facebook Live and here on YouTube. So if this video is a little bit different, that's why. My girlfriend Shauna forwarded me an article from Outside Magazine, and I wanted to share it with all you just because it's a really, really interesting article. It's called, hold on a second. This is what happens to your body on a through hike. So basically, what happened in this was this gentleman, he did a 486-mile trek. He did the Colorado Trail, and basically the trail goes from Denver to Durango in Colorado, and it's a really high altitude trail, and he followed a low carbohydrate diet throughout the hike, not prior to the hike, but throughout the hike. And this was a big change for him. He was an endurance athlete who had survived on carbohydrates for a while. He was doing things like a lot of pasta, lots of potatoes, lots of grains, lots of peanut butter, bananas, things like that. And prior to this hike, that's how he'd been fueling himself. But during this hike, he stuck with nuts, he stuck with jerky, a couple of other different sources of fat. He had a little bit of dried fruit, and then he would have one carbohydrate meal later on in the day just to refuel. And so if you're familiar with ketogenic diets, this is kind of like a carb backloading diet, where you're going to go really low carb throughout the day, and he would have that bigger carbohydrate meal later on in the day. And like I said, that would help to refuel glycogen. But a few things to note here. He actually quantified himself throughout this whole thing. He went through a whole process of testing himself, and he wanted to just see where his blood markers were at. So he measured his testosterone, he measured his cortisol, he had his hemoglobin A1C checked. And prior to starting this trek, he had his hemoglobin A1C checked, and he was actually near pre-diabetic. Which was pretty astounding to him because he'd been an active person his whole life. He exercised 45 to 60 minutes a day, but he ate a lot of energy bars, and he was stuffing himself with pasta every night and stuffing himself with carbs. So he went through this trek. He averaged 18 miles a day. Now, at the beginning of this trek, he was 150 pounds, which is not a big person, and he was about 22% body fat. By the end of the trek, he lost 10 pounds. He was 140 pounds, but he was only 5% body fat. And so he wasn't losing much muscle mass at all. Throughout the trek, he basically lost fat. He was mobilizing his fat stores to provide him energy to get through the trek. And then at the end of the trek, he had his blood tested again, and his hemoglobin A1C was amazing. It was really good. The funny part was he doubled his testosterone levels. His testosterone levels literally doubled. Now, everything we learn in the fitness industry tells us that you're doing 18 miles a day, you're not eating a lot of carbohydrates, your testosterone levels shouldn't, they might be the same. We'd expect them to be a bit lower. They shouldn't double during that time. And his testosterone levels literally doubled. So you want to start to try to dissect these things and think about why this is the case. Why would this happen in this case where this gentleman is trekking 18 miles a day? He's not eating a lot of carbohydrates. Fueling himself with fats throughout the day. Well, there's a couple of different reasons there. One, there's more raw materials there. You got to remember that your hormones, the precursors to them, are cholesterol, right? And so when you have more of the raw materials to work with, you also have more ability to make hormones. But there's another factor here that a lot of people don't quite understand. And this goes back to bulking and some of the other things we see. We see people sometimes eating 5, 6, 7, 8 meals a day. One of the things that happens when you do that is you secrete a lot of insulin, and you also secrete a lot of leptin. Okay, so when you secrete insulin and leptin, insulin is antagonistic to growth hormone. So when you're secreting a lot of insulin from eating, that's a hormone that gets released when you eat, and it helps to carry your carry glucose throughout your body, and it helps to use glucose to fuel your brain, right? So insulin carries glucose to your muscle cells, your liver cells, where they get stored as glycogen, and then if they can't get stored there, they get stored as fat. But when you're secreting insulin a lot, you're not secreting much growth hormone. And so that's one big factor in people who are obese but also hormonally deficient. You know, as you're secreting a lot of insulin and you have a lot of insulin going through your bloodstream a lot, you're also going to be not secreting much growth hormone. And similarly, there's a hormone called leptin that gets secreted when we eat, and it's secreted by our fat cells, and that happens when we eat an abundance of calories. And so when you are secreting leptin is actually antagonistic with DHEA, which is a precursor to testosterone. And so if you're overeating a lot and you're secreting insulin all the time, there's a tendency there to become deficient in hormones like growth hormone and testosterone, because you're not allowing your body the chance to do so. So a big factor, in theory, as to why this guy's testosterone doubled on a very low carbohydrate diet while he's trekking all over the place, is one, because of the lower carbohydrate diet in and of itself, the less insulin being secreted, less calories being taken in overall, less leptin being secreted, more hormones being produced, but also because of the act of walking, he was also able to level out his blood sugar. And that also in turn leads to less insulin being produced. And so, one of the things I always recommend to people is to take, 15, 20-minute walks after you eat. People were talking we did a free webinar today, Matt Cooper and I, and somebody asked us about, ways of adapting into ketosis quicker. And one way is taking a 15 to 20 minute walk right after you eat, just to level out that blood sugar and to level out the amount of insulin that's being produced. So that's just a quick update here. I really found this article interesting. I'm going to put a link below on YouTube and a link in the comment section over on Facebook Live. And I'm going to end the YouTube video right now. So you guys on YouTube, I love you all. Hit me up if you have any questions, and I will definitely answer them.